verses 25 to 34. We read today's text at the beginning of our season of stewardship. When we worry about how we will feed the church, when we worry about how we will clothe the church, where will that money come from? To set us straight, let me say a few practical words. The money to support this community comes from this community. We do what we can to rent the building, and this year the diocese will support us some. And our giving matters to the functioning of this community. The piece of stewardship that we will spend a whole season of prayer on is not the worry of how we will pay for the church. That's a discussion for church councils and vestry meetings. Here, in worship, I want to talk about the spiritual practice of giving a portion of what we get back to God. This is a spiritual practice, like reading scripture or praying. Yeah, that's right. What we do with our money is a spiritual practice. Jesus talks a lot about money, talks about treasure a lot. In the verses just before our passage, Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." In the passages right before our reading, Jesus says, "You cannot serve both God and money." We Christians have often made a mash of this, squishing the language of treasure into meaninglessness. But what if this teaching is as practical as eating? Where do you put your money? And what is your experience of how you choose to allocate your cash? To get this conversation started, let me give you an example. Let me tell you about me. Many of you know I am an adult convert to Christianity. My family were not Christians, and most of them still are not Christians, so I did not know how to be a Christian. I had read the Bible academically, I had studied scripture and biblical history, but Christians are clear. Reading the text does not make you a Christian. Your faith has to change the way you behave, and I didn't know how faithful Christians behaved. For example, I had to be taught how to pray, and I had to be taught what Christians do about money. So it was that one day, as I was learning how to be a Christian, the priest invited me to give a portion of my money to the church. The churchy word for this is tithing. Often it is 10% of your income. We read in Leviticus, "A tenth of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord." But let's not worry about the exact amount. Let's not worry about calculations, only pay attention to the invitation. The invitation to consider tithing came when I was a single mom, supporting my kids on a part-time job. To be clear, I had done all the calculations. I knew that with daycare costs and taxes and my income rate, my part-time was exactly the optimal amount of work. And the kids and I never went hungry. Many among you have known real hunger. We had enough, but nothing extra. And here is this priest inviting me to give a portion of my money to the church, give my money to a church that had, at that time, way more money than I did. I was terrified. I was afraid that the little bit would take away from my children. And I was annoyed to even be wondering about this when I was already worrying about money. I worried about feeding my kids. I worried about what they would wear. I worried, and then I did it anyway. I signed up to give a percentage of my income to the church, and I noticed it. Every time the kids asked me for a treat and I couldn't give it, I knew that I had given that money to God. And every time I wanted a treat, something small like a special coffee, and I couldn't get it, I knew that I had given that money to God. For me, this spiritual practice was a place where I bumped into God in the world. I collided with the difference between what I wanted and what God wanted. And I felt closer to God. Every time I knocked against that money that I did not have, I felt God's presence in my life, and I felt loved. I felt grateful for all that I did have. I felt the tug of sacred presence in my everyday world. Weird, right? It still doesn't make any logical sense to me. At the time, when I was most worried about money, I started giving money to God and then slowly stopped worrying so much about money. Letting go of the control of my money as a spiritual practice was one of the most useful practices in developing my faith. Faith, which can also mean trust, to trust God. This season of stewardship, I am inviting you to wonder about giving a portion of your money to the church. Only, let me clarify, because this is so important, I would like to invite you to see and engage in a spiritual practice. Forget worrying about the church for a little bit. As your priest, I am not looking for you to solve an economic problem. I am inviting you into that spiritual practice. This practice that changed my life and shapes my faith. My experience of tithing is so important to me and so beautiful that I would love everyone to practice it, because I would love everyone to bump into God like I did, like I do. I would wish everyone here to feel closer to God. And now, a couple of practical clarifications, especially because of our passage today. This is not a passage that instructs you or anyone else to be hungry. Jesus tells the birds not to worry, or Jesus tells that the birds don't worry about what they eat. They could maybe worry about if they will eat. And you'll notice that in Jesus' example, the birds are actually fed abundantly. You'll notice that in Jesus' example, the flowers are clothed beautifully. This is about switching the worry of money to the abundance of faith, not being hungry. This is not a passage that tells you to be irresponsible or to abandon your obligations. The birds don't sit and wait for the dinner to come to them while they and the chicks starve. They continue to do all the practical things birds do to catch their dinner and make their nest. This is about switching from the worry of money to the abundance of faith, not irresponsibility. All that. And we see in Jesus' example that the lilies, as beautiful as they are not gossiping about how beautiful those other flowers are over there. It is unspeakably tempting for us to look about the church, especially look around the world, and see all those who have hoarded money. It is easy to read this passage and then turn to noticing all those billionaires who are sending spaceships on luxury tourist trips. This at the same time as the UN declares world hunger on the rise. But you'll notice that Jesus tells this story to his followers, who already did not have a lot of money. This is a story told to disciples about the practice of discipleship. This is a passage that invites us to a specific kind of relationship with our money. This is a passage about how we feel about our money, because it is very easy to accidentally love money more than God. It is very easy to worry about money, and in that worry, accidentally stop looking to create God's kingdom here and now. this Thanksgiving, this season of harvest and abundance, this our season of stewardship. This passage invites us disciples to a spiritual practice as beautiful as the swoop of late summer swallows. This passage invites us disciples to a spiritual practice as lasting as the autumn flowering chrysanthemums that flower in our gardens again and again every year. This passage invites us disciples to a spiritual practice as good for us as a heaping helping of garden fresh salad. This passage helps us to understand that the spiritual practice of tithing, of returning a portion of our abundance to God. And notice that while you might give up some money, don't worry. You will receive an abundant crop of opportunities to bump into the existence and experience of God in everyday living. Thanks be to God.